there's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamma Mia podcast.
Hi, it's Claire Murphy here. We hope you're enjoying well and our exploration of our very own bodies. In our last 4 episodes, we have explored weight loss drugs, and body longevity, and had some really important conversations about weight too. So in this episode, we're sharing a conversation that my very excellent colleague Holly Wainwright had on her podcast Mid with Louisa Nicola, an Australian neurophysiologist and human performance coach, about the best way to look after our body and brain as we get older and how to live better longer. If you're after more women's health news, well, is your full body health check and drops every week on a Thursday. Coming up in our next topic, we focus on sleep and delve into sleep disorders, sleep hygiene, and mindfulness and meditation.
Eat more protein. How about some salmon with that egg? How about some cottage cheese with that steak? How about you sprinkle some creatine all over that thing? What about protein powder in your protein powder for a morning smoothie full of fibre? And while we're at it, how many supplements is too many supplements? Should I, in fact, rattle when I walk? Speaking of walking, is walking enough? Counting my steps, is that just propaganda now? And if I manage to get to the gym, what should I do there? For decades, it's been burn, baby, burn, and now it's lift, baby, lift. Does it feel suddenly like there's a set of new rules that no one sent you? That you just get glimpses of them yelled at you through your phone? 100 grams of protein, bitch, as you scroll past a 28-year-old with fluoroathlesia and a NutriBullet? Well, you'd be right. The rules are new, because the old rules, they were written for men. Sweat, sprint, starve. And they were also written by the toxic body culture we were so surrounded by as we came of age, it was invisible to the naked eye. Size 0, low-rise jeans, thigh gaps, crash diets, and the endless comparison game. Now we've woken up in what feels like a second puberty, and we've only just barely started to understand our bodies. They can feel like angry strangers. Hormones are fluctuating, sleep is elusive, joints ache for no reason, and we're told it's just the beginning. What once worked doesn't work anymore. What once felt intuitive now feels like guesswork. The new rules are kinder, but also confusing. Move your body more, but don't overdo it. Eat red meat, but not too much, because your heart. Get some sun for vitamin D, but also hide that face from those razor rays. Sleep more, meditate, fix your nervous system, add magnesium, track your cycle, cut out sugar, but not fruit. Or is it fruit too? If we decode it, if we find the new rules and write them down, learn to live by them, can we change what's coming? Protect our minds and our bodies from age, from wrinkles and falls, forgetfulness, aches and pains, and the soft stand-up grunt? Can eggs really do all that? Hello, I'm Holly Wainwright and I am midlife, mid-family, mid-lifting my tiny pink weights. Does it feel like you hit a certain birthday with a 0 and everyone starts yelling at you about protein and dumbbells? Well, if it feels like that, you're right, because that's what happens. And for this last episode of Mid for Season 5, we wanted to ask someone smart to tell us exactly why that is. And so we found a woman called Louisa Nicola and asked her what she thought of all the things midwomen are told to do. Why Louisa? Well, because she is an Australian neurophysiologist and human performance coach who's living in the US and working there at the moment, right at the forefront of all the science about longevity and health and performance and exercise and food. She used to be a world championship triathlete, representing Australia at all kinds of major international events before a serious injury stopped her athletic career in its tracks. But that also set her on the path to understand what she calls brain training and become an expert in basically telling us normies what athletes and high performance people know to be true. One of the things we're going to talk to Louisa about today is how to care for our brains as we age, but we are going to talk to her too about our bodies, because that is one of the things that everybody's always talking to us about. What are the things to prioritise to live better, longer? To be honest, the priorities she told me were a serious surprise. So here we go. This is your no BS guide to the new rules of a better life. But before we get started, I need to make this clear. The information discussed in this episode is not intended to replace professional medical advice. Supplement availability, safety and regulation vary between countries, including Australia. You always need to seek guidance from your GP or a pharmacist and ensure that any therapeutic goods are listed on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods before you go near them. And if you listen to this conversation and you wonder, I thought you might mention this supplement or this supplement because I see them everywhere, there is a good reason why not. And that is because here in Australia, we're actually pretty lucky that our regulations are really tight about what you can and can't talk about and promote. So if there are a few gaps here, that's why, but I still think you are going to find this conversation with Louisa Nicola really, really interesting. Protein, sleep, exercise, oh my. Louisa, I'm just so happy to be talking to you today because as a woman of my age, I'm kind of completely overwhelmed by all the stuff I'm being told to do and knowing what's real, what's helpful, what's not. And then if I am, I know a lot of other women are, right? And I'd like to start with a big gun. So if there's one thing we can advise a woman who's in her let's say she's in her 40s, that her relationship with fitness is pretty typical, which is that maybe she goes in fits and starts. She might stick to a gym regime for a while and then drop out of it. She's had times in her life when she's been fitter and times in her life where she's been less so. What is the one thing we can advise this woman to do to change the quality of the next 20 years or so? What would it be?
Well, first of all, Holly, thank you for having me. You're definitely tapping on something that is becoming quite an epidemic. We all are inevitably going to face the decline of estrogen and progesterone somewhere throughout our life. I think what's happening now is menopause is really at the spotlight. It is gaining a lot of traction. And this is really due to the fact that we had a lot of misinformation around menopause and estrogen, et cetera. And this is now causing a lot of women in midlife and even at the age of 40 to start rethinking their decisions. So to cut a long story short, because I know we're going to evolve throughout this conversation, and to answer your question, what can a woman do right now to improve the next 20 years of her life? Well, look, she can do many things, okay? But let's talk about what actually happens at this stage of life in the fourth decade. Well, the transition into menopause comes at around a decade prior to the menopause onset. So if we're thinking at around the average age, maybe 42, 43 is the onset of perimenopause, when we start to see the decline of estrogen and progesterone, we need to start thinking about what is actually happening. Because in my opinion, menopause doesn't just happen to your ovaries. It's a neuroendocrine malfunction, really. We have a lot of things that happen to our brain. And as a result of that, we then go through a cascade of issues ranging from bone mineral density. We see a decline in that. We see a decline in bone mass, in strength, in muscle mass, in cognitive functions. And these are the things we need throughout our lifespan. Throughout my work and through what I do for a living and what I research, which is Alzheimer's disease, what I can safely say is the one thing you should do right now in your 40s is practice good exercise. You mentioned people, some women go through stages of they're really motivated. They go to the gym for a week and maybe they go off the gym. And what we know is that consistency is key, right? Because if we're going to build a good foundation for our body when we're 80 and when we're 90, even in your 60s and 70s, really, it's got to be consistent effort, consistently going to the gym, consistently putting in work. And if you have to follow a structured program from a personal trainer, I think that's actually becoming more of a need these days, just to really get the foundation set.
So what we keep being told right now is to forget the hardcore cardio that we might have been doing to chase a dress size in our 20s and focus on weights. Is it that simple? And is that the shift we should definitely make?
It's not that simple, but let me tell you, there is a need for everything, every part of exercise. When we are looking into the scientific literature, we're usually separating exercises into three buckets, right? We've got strength training, We've got cardiovascular training, which is your zone 2, easy, long runs, long swim sessions, etc. Cardio, if you will. And then we've got this high intensity training, right? So if we look at across the board, what is going to give you the biggest bang for your buck? It would be strength. And that's because we lose strength and muscle mass at a very rapid rate. It comes on in the 4th decade, right? And we females need more strength. If we had to, we still need to work on our cardiovascular fitness, right? When we're looking at cardiovascular fitness, we're also taking into account that we're training the powerhouses of our cells, which is called the mitochondria. We've got more mitochondria than men. So a lot of this marketing, what you're seeing when you're talking about zone 2 training, which is dubbed at you should be doing cardio at least 3 hours a week, that's really looking at males. Women should actually be prioritizing strength. And when I say strength, I'm talking about weights. So resistance training, and then high intensity training. That's like when you're going hard out, not HIIT training, but high intensity, hard out efforts, and then cardio.
I've heard you rail against the little pink weights we all have.
Yes. It's I try and say women should move away from the pink weights because listen, it's not doing you anything. You're actually wasting your time if you're at the gym lifting small, light weights. If we want to prevent sarcopenia, which is age-related muscle loss, if we want to enhance our metabolic rate and glucose metabolism, we need to, without being too scientific, but we need to trigger mechanoreceptors in muscle fibers, right? And that is triggered when we lift heavy. To improve our muscle mass, increase our muscle mass, we have to lift heavy. You're not going to get anything from lifting these 2-kilo dumbbells, which are often painted pink.
Okay, let's get a bit more serious. I think we'll come back to exercise in a while. So women my age, apparently we cannot eat enough protein. It's just protein, protein, protein. You can't buy cottage cheese anywhere in the shops at the moment because the older women have eaten it all. Eat eggs, fish, meat, eggs and fish, more and more. I wonder if what we're being told is right.
Look, I actually thought it was, and I still do. I think that bare minimum, every single individual, but mainly women, should be having at minimum 100 grams of protein a day. And it varies, right? Because we should be eating around 1.6 to 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. So, if you're 70 kilos, then literally just 70 kilos, you literally multiply 70 by 1.6, and that's how much protein you should be having a day. And that varies.
What does that much protein actually look like?
To be honest, it's quite difficult for a lot of women. It's quite difficult for me to hit my protein goals every day. But it looks like having 150 grams of chicken breast for lunch, another 150 grams of chicken breast or similar for dinner, having 2 to 3 eggs in the morning.
So the protein is key?
Protein is key. However, I just interviewed one of the biggest scientists in protein. So he was actually responsible for the twin study that was actually documented on Netflix. And he said something really interesting to me. He noted that muscle mass and strength is actually 90% resistance training and 10% protein. So I was even fed this lie. That we needed so much protein to gain muscle mass. But it turns out that if you're not actually stimulating the mechanoreceptors, as I mentioned earlier, if you're not even lifting heavy, but you're meeting your protein requirement needs, it doesn't even matter. But I just want to add on top of that as well, protein also has other wonders where you can increase your metabolic rate by eating it. So it takes a lot to digest protein. So once you eat protein, you're also burning calories. And it keeps you fuller for longer. If you can, try and prioritize at least 100 grams a day.
Okay, that's good. Sensible advice. Good for me to know. I want to ask you about something else. Vitamin D, sunshine. I'm also being told lots of vitamin D.
Vitamin D is really interesting, right? We call it vitamin D, but it's a hormone synthesized by the sun, right? Now, I live in the US. I live in New York. So a lot of people in the US are actually vitamin D deficient. So we measure it over here with nanograms per deciliter. And what we are trying to, and you can do the conversions in Australian metrics. And so what we're trying to get everyone to is around 60 nanograms per deciliter, but the average is around 20 nanograms per deciliter. This doesn't mean that you are sun deficient, right? I mean, it can, but it could mean that you are magnesium deficient. So I've had private clients and patients who we've worked on their vitamin D levels, and we've brought their vitamin D levels up just by supplementing them with magnesium alone, because we need magnesium to make vitamin D. So vitamin D is extremely, extremely important. It's involved in many enzymatic processes in the body. So if you are vitamin D deficient, and it's so easy to get tested, just go to the GP, get a blood test, and you will see if you are vitamin D deficient or not.
How would you feel if you were vitamin D deficient? Like, how would you know if you were?
That's a thing. You wouldn't know. It could present as dry skin. It could present as fatigue. It could present as going to the gym and not being able to lift heavy fast enough. But it's not like you can't get a headache and think, oh, I'm vitamin D deficient.
Yeah, right. Okay. And a few of those things you just said are often symptoms that menopausal or perimenopausal women are living with anyway.
I know, right?
After this break, Louisa Nicola and I discuss what might feel like the most elusive part of this whole thing, sleep. All right, I want to ask you about sleep, because that's another thing we're being told is so important. And we all know that that's true, of course, but sleep hygiene is such a buzz term right now. Lots of products we can buy to optimize our sleep and measure our sleep and see how it's going. Sleep often becomes a really big problem for women around this phase of life anyway. We've got the anxious 2 a.m. wake up. That would be very familiar to lots of our listeners. How important is sleep?
So sleep is incredibly important. We go through many things during sleep. Sleep is not just this thing that happens, right? During sleep, we go through two different phases. We go through non-REM sleep and then we go through REM sleep. During the non-rapid eye movement sleep, we go through a period which is stage 3, deep sleep. And I can't tell you how important this stage is to get into and to stay into. Right? We don't want to just get into deep sleep for 10 minutes out of the night. We really want to be spending maybe at least 3 hours of deep sleep at night. I track my sleep, rigorously using 3 different types of monitors. And I can tell you, even sometimes I am experiencing fluctuations in my sleep. So during deep sleep, what happens is we activate this system, which is called the glymphatic system. And this is like a washing machine in your brain. What happens is all of the cerebral spinal fluid goes through your brain and cleans out all of the debris throughout the day. I'm talking amyloid beta that builds up during the day. We've got toxins. We've got other burdens. Apparently now we've got microplastics in our brain, which was actually stated first in an Australian study. So sleep is so important. And there's so many things that we can do to improve both the quality of our sleep and the quantity of our sleep. However, we now know that consistency and regularity of sleep is more important than quantity and quality. So going to sleep at the same time every day and waking up at the same time every day, which is so hard, right? I travel like every 3 weeks for work. So that's incredibly hard for me. But maintaining a regular sleep and wake up time, and actually doesn't matter whether you're sleeping 12 p.m. till 8 a.m., all right, or 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. It's based on your chronotype. And you can take a chronotype quiz online, just type it in, take a quiz, figure out whether you're an early bird or a night owl, and you can go to sleep at whatever time that you like.
There used to be a saying that like the hours before midnight are worth more than the sleep you get after. Is that true?
No, I thought that was true as well, but I sit on the board with one of the most well-known sleep doctors, and we had dinner probably, I would say 2 months ago, and I brought this up with him and he slammed the table. He's like, stop saying this, and he explained it to me that it's built on chronotypes.
Tell me what your sleep hygiene looks like to get the kind of sleep that you do.
Oh.
Tell me.
So it's really important for me to be able to bring my nervous system down prior to sleep. So a lot of people, if you work in a sleep lab, right, for example, and you get a patient, you're often asked two things. Do you have problem falling asleep or trouble staying asleep? And it varies across the board. So for me, first of all, I sleep in a pitch black room. So I've got blackout curtains. I wear religiously an eye mask every night. Even though I've got blackout curtains, I still wear an eye mask. I sleep on a temperature controlled mattress. And I know not everyone can do that, but it's a bit fancy. But I have an app on my phone and I can control the temperature of the bed. So it goes cold and then hot and all throughout the night. I have set it at around 59 degrees Fahrenheit. But it's actually separated into cycles. So it knows Louisa's in deep sleep. So I'm going to bring the temperature of the bed down. Louisa is in light sleep. So I'm going to bring it down. I'm going to bring it up a bit more. And I've got an alarm on it. I'm like, well, bed, wake me up at 7 a.m. So it starts to heat up at 6:30 in the morning because heat is actually what wakes us up. Well, heat and light, but it's like when the sun comes up, it warms your body, which then releases cortisol, and cortisol is what wakes you up, right? So I've got the bed to heat up half an hour prior to waking.
Look, that sounds awesome. Do you use mouth tape? I see mouth tape everywhere.
I sometimes do. I don't think it plays as big of a role as what we think. I think that's more in line with the beauty hacks, if you will. So I don't mouth tape, but I also don't mouth breathe.
So if I don't have a temperature controlled mattress and perfect blackout, the best thing I can do to get myself in a good place for sleep is to wind down, yes? We've all heard no phones, no blue light. How long before bed? And also I hear the longevity guys saying you should stop eating a long time before you go to sleep. Does that make a big difference?
So when we eat, it raises our core body temperature. Now, in order to fall asleep and stay asleep, our core body temperature needs to drop at least 2 degrees. This is why I sleep on a temperature-controlled mattress. You don't want to be eating too close to bedtime. I usually say make sure you've had your last meal an hour and a half to 2 hours prior to going to bed. And that's to allow for digestion, right? Anything above that, right? I mean, Brian Johnson is having his last meal at 11 a.m. And I think that's just really, really poor education and marketing for the world. That is, in my opinion, stupid. So, and I don't think that's in line with females. So
it's also not that realistic to most people's lives, let's be honest.
Yeah. And I really want the women listening to understand that we are not men. All right. So if you hear a male say something, it might be great for us, right? But we have to we have to dig a little bit deeper, and women just need more fuel in different ranges of, different stages of our lives. So I don't think that's correct. But I also don't think eating at 10 p.m. and then going to bed at 10:30 is correct. So
just while we're on what you were just saying about the men, do you think that one of the reasons it can feel that the health advice coming at women, particularly women going through hormonal changes, feels like a lot is because we're sort of waking up to the fact that a lot of the medical conventions we've been sold about what's good for us were all about men. And now as we're learning more about women, there's all this new information to share.
Yes. So first of all, women are very hard to study in the lab. So a lot of the studies that have been done on men because they're easier. Why are they easier? Because you have to conduct the gold standard in academic medicine, which is called a randomized control trial. You need women over a long period of time. Now, what happens with women? Well, we go through menopause. So hormones change. So that's going to skew the data. Some women want to have a child within a 10-year framework. So that skews the data. So women just became somewhat difficult to work with, right? So therefore, not a lot of funding was placed upon them. So a lot of the funding was placed on men because they were just easier subjects. And then we put out all of this information. Scientists were like, well, this, fasting does this, or zone 2 training does this, and it improves this, but we forgot to include women in that. And we just thought okay, well, this study says this, but we don't really understand sex differences. We're now becoming more attuned with sex differences between men and women. We know that women have more estrogen receptors in their brain than men. We know that men go through their own type of menopause, but the average age of menopause for a woman is 52. Men, it's in their 70s. So that's called andropause. So that was why all of the marketing was really geared at men.
Yeah, right. And now we're understanding that better. There's a lot to learn.
Oh, look, I'm in neurosurgery 3 days a week. I study the brain rigorously. It's all I do. It's all I've done for the past 15 years. And every day I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know that much.
Before we get to dementia and Alzheimer's, you mentioned fasting just now, and I wanted to ask you about eating in general. A lot of women around my age have lived in diet culture forever, right? We've sort of withheld food from ourselves. We've tried a million different diets. We've tried Atkins and keto. We've gone don't eat before 2 p.m., only at this time, not at that time. Do you think that women, maybe a lot of women, are actually restricting themselves too much with food at this time in their life rather than not enough?
Yeah, I think women just don't understand food, right? We just, there's so much to learn. Fasting is both beneficial and can be detrimental. It depends. And even with women, just because it depends on stages of menstrual cycle. What if you are planning for a pregnancy, you're starving yourself, and then you claim that you're infertile, but maybe you're just not eating enough to produce the necessary amount of estrogen to go into ovulation, etc. So fasting is great. It can turn on autophagy, which is whatever. It can actually stimulate stem cells. But I think that women should maybe move away from that and maybe move towards understanding macronutrients, like how much protein do I need in a day and how can I maybe get off sugar and saturated fats and ultra-processed foods and eat a really good lean diet and exercise. It's not rocket science, right? It's like, then we can look at calories in, calories out, but it's not rocket science. If you are lifting and you are working out every day and moving your body, getting your 10,000 steps and eating a whole food diet without going overboard, I mean, that's the secret sauce.
It's really interesting to shift to that nourish yourself rather than punish yourself, I think a lot of women have lived a lot of years of life. I shouldn't eat that. I can't have that. I'm bad if my lunch is too big. It's like we've got a lot of emotion attached to it and we need to shift to a nourish perspective, right?
Yeah. Nourishing your body and eating well to lift heavy is, I think, the new sexy. That's what we have to start to think. Skinny, frail is just not going to cut it anymore. If you want to lift heavy, if you want to have the energy, and if you don't want to fall and break your hip, well, you have to get used to eating. You have to get used to eating the rainbow. I just did a podcast with Dr. Tim Spector, who's a professor, and he is an epidemiologist who looks into the gut microbiome. And he was telling me how eating the rainbow is really important and that our gut microbiome is very much correlated to diseases such as cardiovascular disease, cancer, Alzheimer's disease. So feeding your microbiome, getting the necessary amount of nutrients is going to help you throughout midlife.
Also, the rainbow is a nice picture to remember. Eat the rainbow. Make it as simple as you can.
Yeah.
Okay, you talked before about if you want to not fall and break a hip. This is a large part of why we're telling women to eat so well and lift heavy, right? It's trying to avoid osteoporosis. Is that right? Is that what we're all trying to avoid?
Yep. Osteoporosis is something that occurs during the late stages, like postmenopausal women, just because of the depletion of estrogen. We have estrogen receptors on our bones. So if they are not stimulated through estrogen, and this is even if you're taking HRT, for example, if you're getting on hormones, even if it's not, we need to stimulate our bone mass, because bone mass obviously reduces the risk of osteoporosis and fractures. But what happens is we need to stimulate something called osteoblasts. Okay. And that's the creation of these new bone cells. But what happens is we get during menopause a huge turnover of osteoclasts. So the breaking down of the bones at a much faster rate than the osteoblasts. So we're not regenerating our bone cells as much. Now, how do we overcome that? Well, vitamin D actually is incredibly important for that because our bones are made of many things. So vitamin D can help you offset that. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to working out at the gym and lifting heavy. Like I mentioned earlier, weight training, mechanical loading.
After this break, I asked Louisa about what most of us fear the most when we think about getting older: dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and cognitive decline. I've heard you say that your mission is to eradicate Alzheimer's disease. Now, am I incorrect when I'm sometimes saying dementia and sometimes saying Alzheimer's? Are they different things? Just so I've got my language right.
Yes. So dementia is the umbrella term that is used just to speak about a deficit in our cognitive abilities. Now, underneath dementia sits Alzheimer's disease, dementia with Lewy body, Parkinson's dementia, frontotemporal dementia. The reason why we know Alzheimer's disease is because it is the most prevalent out of all of the dementias. Alzheimer's dementia. 55 million people, but actually around 60 million people worldwide have this disease. That number is going to triple by the year 2050. So Alzheimer's disease is different. They've all got different pathologies.
Why is it going to triple?
We have substantial evidence to show that lifestyle and environment affects the rates of Alzheimer's disease. So I mentioned around 60 million people worldwide. If you have a look across the board, around 95% of these people got Alzheimer's disease through lifestyle, not because of a genetic makeup.
So that's why when you say your mission is to eradicate it, you believe this is preventable with lifestyle changes.
I believe it is a 100% preventable disease.
So a lot of the people listening to this will have loved ones who've been through this. And again, maybe the umbrella term dementia, maybe not specifically Alzheimer's. And a lot of midlife women are terrified that's what's going to happen to them because sometimes they've seen really distressing things happen to their loved ones in this space. So of all the things we've been talking about today, is that part of what will help this prevention, or is this a whole separate thing?
So first of all, it's interesting to note that, 1 in 3 people, you look around, you sit, if you're in a room with 2 other people, one of you is going to get the disease. 2 out of 3 cases of Alzheimer's disease is female, which is even more scarier for females. Good and bad news, right? When we talk about genetics, there is a difference between genetic risk factors and genetic mutations. Genetic mutations are mistakes in the genetic code. For example, if you've got a genetic mutation on chromosome 4, you will get Huntington's disease, okay? We have, when it comes to Alzheimer's disease, there's only 3 genetic mutations involved in the disease. That's presenilin 1, presenilin 2, and the APP gene. That only accounts for about, I would say, 0.5% of the Alzheimer's disease cases. The other part of it is genetic risk factors. You've probably heard of the ApoE4 gene. This is a risk factor gene. Now, we've all got the ApoE gene, the apolipoprotein epsilon gene. And we get 2 alleles. We get one from mum, one from dad. And it consists of ApoE2, 3, and 4. If we get 2 copies of the ApoE2 gene, for example, which is extremely rare, but ApoE2 is a protective gene. So if you've got at least 1 allele, then you're in a really good place. Then you can be an E3, which doesn't raise your risk at all of getting the disease, and it doesn't lower your risk. It's the average. I'm an E3 carrier. I've had a patient who was E3, E2, which was phenomenal. That's what I wish I had, but you don't determine that, your parents do. Then we've got the ApoE4 gene. Now the ApoE4, you can either have 1 copy or you can have 2 copies. Now Chris Hemsworth has 2 copies of the gene, which means that he raises his risk over 10 times of getting the disease. And this gene is involved in what we call lipid metabolism. So basically in our brain, we have different transporters that help transport fats. And so we can utilize fat in our brain, different types of fats, right? And if we have the ApoE4 gene as opposed to the ApoE2, the ApoE4 basically becomes a dumb transporter. It doesn't help us, it doesn't allow us to transport fat as well as we do. So what ends up happening? Well, our brain is the most vascular rich organ in the entire body. So then we end up getting the accumulation of fat in the vessels of our brain. So just like we do with cardiovascular disease, which is an occlusion in a blood vessel because of the buildup of plaque, it can happen in our brain. Now, this could lead to a stroke, or it could lead to an occlusion in one of the vessels in the brain, which stops our brain from functioning correctly. So the ApoE4 gene raises your risk of getting the disease, but it's not a foregone conclusion. If you are an E4 carrier, by the way, I think everybody should get tested. Everyone can get tested. And if you're scared, it's just like figuring out whether the bus is coming if you're on the road. You want to know what you're up against. You don't have to do it, but it's nice to know. So let's just say you do have either 1 copy or 2 copies. It just means you have to be a bit more vigilant with your lifestyle interventions. It may mean really honing down with your cholesterol panel, right? Looking at your LDL cholesterol, looking at your ApoB cholesterol. We know that especially in women, and this was a really well-known study that was released, especially in women who are E4 carriers, you want to maintain a LDL cholesterol level below 70. That's American units. So we know that we need to really consider cardiovascular disease risk as well.
So assuming that testing is available, but even if not, we should be considering all these lifestyle choices we're talking about today to be helpful in safeguarding against Alzheimer's as well as cardio issues and all the other things we might worry about in terms of our aging bodies?
Yeah, there's a real nice saying, which is what's good for the heart is good for the brain. So just remember that even if you don't have an E4 copy, you are still at risk of getting Alzheimer's disease if you do not sleep well, if you do not exercise every day, if you do not lower your stress, if you do not look at your micronutrient profiles.
So to recap, if you were going to tell midlife women who are totally lost when it comes to how to care for themselves, what should they start doing today?
I have this pyramid, and the pyramid, at the bottom of the pyramid, for you to age well, sits exercise. It is the ultimate, in my opinion, the ultimate elixir for longevity and brain health. So we really want to hone in the exercise. On top of that is sleep, and then it's nutrition. I would definitely recommend everybody getting a blood test, figure out what you might be deficient in, figure out, are you perimenopausal? Do you need to discuss hormone replacement therapy with your OBGYN? These are the things that we need to be doing, but the biggest bang for your buck. Oh, and also lower the bad stress that comes into your life and manage anxiety if you can.
There you are, friends. If there's one takeaway from that I've internalized, it's exercise. That the pyramid for well-being goes exercise, then sleep, then nutrition. And of course, protein, creatine, magnesium, sleep. If you're like me, you probably need to listen to this again and write some things down. And the other most important thing that Louisa said to us is to remember that we are not men. As we start to understand our bodies again and learn to care for them now, respecting the complexities of the female body and specifically your female body is key. Okay, friends, go and eat an egg and lift something heavy and enjoy feeling kick-ass. I will see you back here for mid-season 6 in a few short weeks. Until then, thank you so much for being with us through this season of Mid. The executive producer of this episode is Naima Brown. The producer is Tali Blackman, and we've had audio production by Jacob Round. I'll see you next time. The information discussed in this episode is not intended to replace professional medical advice. Please remember that. Supplement availability, safety and regulation vary between countries, including Australia. Always seek guidance from your GP or pharmacist and ensure any therapeutic goods are listed on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, the ARTG.
Mamma Mia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.
Hi, I'm obstetrician Dr. Patrick Maloney.
And I'm Bridget Maloney. We're the hosts of The Kick, the pregnancy podcast that breaks down everything you need to know about making and growing a tiny human.
We cover it all with expert information and evidence-based discussion based on our experience of running a women's clinic and being parents to 4 boys.
From morning sickness to birth plans, strange cravings to baby movements, listen to The Kick wherever you get your podcasts.